You're listening to Outside the Bubble, episode 34. I'm your host, Joanna Bull. How are you? I am sick. I have a head cold. I should not be operating heavy machinery, and right now my brain feels like heavy machinery. It is the third week of school. I've been back for 3 weeks now, and I already had to take 2 days off. My poor husband has been sick for almost 2 weeks. He was diagnosed with strep throat, and I said to him, I do not have what you have. There is no way I have strep throat. I don't think I do, but I feel terrible. The show must go on, though. I hope you are feeling better. I'm sure you can hear it in my voice. I can hear it in my head. It sounds like I'm underwater. Now, I love being underwater. I came back recently from scuba diving in the Philippines. It was fantastic. However, I don't like feeling or sounding like I'm underwater when I am not. But I'm excited about this episode. I had so much fun recording this conversation with our guest today. Now, I always get my guests to send me a bio, and I normally read the bio. And I am feeling like reading the bio and then asking the guest to introduce themselves is redundant. Today, I'm not going to do that. I have a fantastic guest with me today. Her name is Minette. She's going to introduce herself in a moment. And our conversation is all about creativity. I am sure you are familiar with the language 21st century competencies or global competencies. And one of those is creativity. And what I find is so many of us, me included, actually don't know how to explicitly teach creativity. Like, is creativity part of visual arts? Is it part of the arts? Is it part of language arts? Where does creativity fit? And Minette's going to unpack a whole bunch of that for us today. What I love about this conversation is the fact that Minette actually works with adults around creative marketing. Her book is so much fun, and the conversation got me thinking about some of the pieces that have been missing for me when it comes to my own planning. I am a creative person. I am not a data person. In fact, looking at a spreadsheet makes my brain go bananas. It's like I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand how to understand what's going on. Things like spreadsheets and even maps, they do this really bizarre thing to my brain. So I've actually always struggled with planning. I think I'm a super fun teacher, but actually writing out lesson plans in this sort of like prescribed way has always been a struggle for me. And part of it is because it doesn't activate the correct creative aspects of my personality. So going through Minette's book and even just seeing the way that she has her creatives make their business plan sparked so much joy for me that I understand now what I was missing. And I hope for those of you that have struggled in the same way that I've struggled, you're able to notice some of the creative elements within yourself and bridge the gap in a way that's actually super fun instead of grunt work and stressful. All right, so let's get this conversation started with Minette. Minette, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here, Joanna. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
That's always such a great question. And either, can be intimidating at times and exciting at other times. And so when people ask me what I do today, my answer is often, I'm still trying to figure that out. So for 11 years, I was a publisher of a magazine. For the last 7 years, I've been a successful coach for thriving and wannabe entrepreneurs trying to start their businesses, primarily focused on other creatives, artists, writers, graphic designers. And I'm moving into really claiming my own creative journey, stepping more into owning the title of artist And writer is one that I love as well. But the work that I am passionate about is in really supporting women to reconnect to their own creativity, because I believe that when we're all focused on doing our best, most brilliant work, we can solve all the world's problems.
That was a fantastic introduction. I love
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
Now, before I hit record, I actually told you which question I was going to ask you first, but I didn't know that that was the intro you were going to give me or give all of us. So I'm actually going to throw something different out there. So you mentioned creative and artist.
Mm-hmm.
How are those different, or how are they the same in your experience?
Yeah, great question. That's a super juicy question. So from my perspective, an artist is a creative person, but I believe that we are all creative. As a species, we are innately creative. And what I think has happened, and is an incredible disservice to all of us as adults and to our children as well, is to conflate creativity with art making. And for example, I am married to an amazing man who is a software engineer. He's a programmer, has been doing that for 30 years. And he's one of the most creative people I know. Programming, to me, is incredibly creative. The way that they can look at the code and make something work that is unrelated on the external piece to the code. He also is an amazing musician, which he's passed on to my kids. I have two drummers in my family, which is a journey. But I like to think of creative almost as a form of artistry. And artistry is simply defined in the dictionary as skill or ability. And while it often gets applied to art making, creativity is at the core of everything we do. Some people are creative in the kitchen. Some people, yes, are dancers, musicians, and photographers. Teachers are incredibly creative. Having been fortunate enough to be in the presence of some really amazing teachers in my lifetime as a kid and as an adult, and some really bad teachers, we know the really creative ones who are really tuned in and listening to the needs of the students in the room. So for me, creative can mean artist, but it means so much more. To me, it is the way that we look at the world, the way that we solve problems, the way that we approach thinking, innovation, and imagination.
That's so great. I love that definition, and I love the separation of them.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who spent, 11 years in the classroom, many of those years as a visual arts teacher, one of my goals was always really to strive for my students to understand creative expression.
Yeah.
Because some of the kids that I was sitting in front of wanted to go to school for art, and some of them just wanted a space as an outlet.
Yeah. Beautiful. You must have been an amazing art teacher. I wish you had been my art teacher.
I am a very creative person. I am not necessarily the best artist. And
right.
Getting other people to understand the difference can be a challenge for sure.
It is. And yet this is like such an important conversation on so many levels to be having, because I think creativity is essential in the classroom and it supports kids' learning, even if that means they're allowed to doodle and color with crayons while they're listening to a math lecture. There's so many ways to bring creativity into the classroom. At my live events for adults, at my business planning events, I give everybody mandalas to color inside the workbooks, and I challenge them to color throughout the event and to let go of the need for taking a million notes and trying to remember everything, and just trusting that they're going to get whatever they need if they just stay really present and listen. And coloring actually opens our ears and allows us to listen in very different ways. And so there's so many ways that we can help support people in recognizing how creative they are, by reminding them that it has nothing to do with drawing. And that's the biggest one I think I hear, is when people say, oh, I'm not creative, I can't draw, right? And that equation between the two, to me, is like a big thing that needs to be disrupted. And in corporate America, or actually globally right now, all the studies are showing that creativity is desired as one of the number one leadership skills. for companies in their hiring. And LinkedIn this year did an amazing study, and they determined from all of their tons of data that they have that creativity is the number one soft skill needed and sought after by companies for new hires. So the conversation around creativity, I think, is happening at every level right now, from preschool all the way to adult education at local community colleges. There's more and more diverse types of conversations happening around what creativity is and why it's so important to us personally and professionally.
Yeah, definitely. And I hear those conversations too in education, like the need to bring in more creativity. One of the things that I'm noticing is that people don't really understand what creativity is or how to bring more of it in.
Right.
So you talked about there's several strategies, and the coloring and doodling is fantastic. What other strategies are you utilizing or seeing people utilize?
Yeah, so I think the simpler, the better. So I would say, coloring or doodling is great. Not to forget movement as a form of creative play. So whether that's taking students for a walk, just getting them to sit up for or stand up for a couple of minutes and do a few jumping jacks while reciting verbs, for example. So my academic background is in Spanish. I was a Spanish teacher. And we spent a lot of time trying to memorize verbs and grammar and vocabulary. And there's sometimes when kids, so much less now I see with my own kids, but when there's things they need to remember or acronyms that they're learning, add movement to it, which is super creative. The kids love it and they embody the information. So coloring is one. I would say embodiment is another. And then always adding a visual aspect to anything that you're teaching, right? So whether that's botanical drawings in a basic science class or in math, having kids create graphs that are really colorful instead of just looking at the numbers. Anytime you can add a visual aspect, obviously from a learning styles approach, it appeals to the visual learners in the room, but we're all in some way or another visual learners. We all have the ability and the way that things are taught that's very visual, and we're used to, especially kids today, we're looking at screens all the time, whether they're computers or iPads or phones or televisions or whatever. Kids are used to consuming information visually. So how can you make that visual consumption more playful, more colorful, and usually more age appropriate as well? Just looking for how can you make it really fun. I was recently working with a client who's building a resilience training program for teachers to be able to take into the classroom based on a principles and process called Heart Math. And she was showing me some of the video training that they'd done for the kids, which was all cartoon based. And it was so age appropriate, right? My daughter was with me watching this video demo, who's 17, and she's like, oh my God, this is so boring. I'm like, well, it's not age appropriate. Think about being in third grade or fourth grade and watch it. And she's like, oh, so paying attention to the development of the visuals so that they make sense to the kids.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm very excited about this conversation because everything that you've talked about so far is just been my feeling for such a long time. And the team that I work on, because of the type of work that we do, we spend a lot of time with text and with writing. And when I survey the room of just people or participants, when I'm facilitating a workshop, I like to ask the question, like, how do you consume your content? Mm-hmm. Are you reading? Are you watching video? Right. Do you look at infographics? And more and more and more, it's the visual content. That is the way that people are learning and consuming.
And it's so funny because I do not like to watch video. Like, I don't watch Facebook Live videos. I don't watch YouTube videos. My kids only watch YouTube. They only watch the videos. Like, I love watching people making art on YouTube and on Instagram. I can get really lost in the Instagram rabbit hole watching people making art. But most of the time, I think it's understanding how my audience receives information. I love to talk. You might be able to tell that from just listening to me. And I love to write, and I can consume written information so much faster but I'm 54. It's how I was raised. It was how I was taught. I was an avid reader from a very young age. It's my favorite form of consumption, but I'm very present to how my clients and potential clients want to learn. And one of the people I've seen in the coaching industry who's really brilliant at this is a woman named Marisa Murgatroyd. And I took an online training from her a few years ago, and she came out of the film industry. And in her trainings, she totally gamified it, and she would put silly movie clips in there and funny little sounds. When you finished a lesson, you would get a little ka-ching sound. And she just made it so engaging and made people really stick with it, which in online training programs, it's really difficult to sustain engagement if things are boring and there's no community and no conversation happening. So looking in the classroom for the same thing, where can you include a trendy pop song that the kids love? And if you don't know what they are, just go ask the kids, they will tell you. Where can you include a funny or poignant, memorable movie clip? Put GIFs in your email communications or online communications with students. Like, just how can you use the technology that they're using to just keep their attention and create, because interrupts are also creative moments for inspiration. When you explain something to them and then you interrupt that with something funny or silly, it actually gives them a brain break and then allows them to move on to the next chunk of information. I'm also finding as a mom and an educator that kids these days, they can't listen to you talk at them for 30 minutes, right? And don't want to. And so learning how to break that up and things that are unique and different than just let's get in groups of 4 and talk about this. Well, let's get in groups of 4 and draw it out. Like some of the opportunities for presentations my kids have had over the last few years, I think they've had some amazing teachers. They're doing a lot of online presentations, virtual presentations. They're not doing as much as the old sort of foam core bulletin board. They're creating videos and mini movies, and it's easier than we think. I think it's almost like we just need to brainstorm a toolbox of what the opportunities are to add those creative, playful elements to our classroom, and then just kind of cycle through them. It doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't always have to be a teachable moment either. It doesn't always, I think, have to be aligned and on task with whatever's happening in the classroom. Just, again, it's inserting that playfulness. The more you insert play, and I love combining creativity with play, I think that the more open we are, both as kids and adults, to taking in new information.
Yeah, definitely. I want to go back to your workshops with adults just for a moment.
Sure.
So how do they react when you present these pieces to them? I mean, I imagine people are coming to you knowing who you are. So I'm thinking about educators that I work with. And for any educators that are listening that do teacher training or facilitate staff meetings or anything like that, the kids we can get on board sometimes. Though as they go up in grade, they're a little bit more resistant to those fun elements.
Yeah.
Grade 11, grade 12, it's a little bit more difficult. But as soon as it's adults, it's like half are on board, maybe not even half. Some are on board, some are open. And then there's a whole bunch that are just going to sit with their arms crossed not saying out loud, although some of them will, this is stupid, I don't want to do this.
Yes. So
yeah,
this is awesome. And I have quite a few examples, but I'll give a couple of specific ones. So first of all, everything I've done as a business coach has been for creatives. So usually if people are coming to me, they may not think they're creative. And by the time they've done anything with me, they all know they're creative because we make it playful and fun. But I had this one live event where I had this one woman, former military. She was a retired colonel in the Air Force and was moving into a coaching career. And so, I do my whole thing, and it's a 3-day training on creating your business plan and your vision for your business. And so it's pretty creative anyway. And so I had a couple of people that are just coloring away. And I usually put, in the workbook, there's like 3 or 4 mandalas. And so by day 3, I have people that have colored every single one of them, or they've at least started coloring on all of them. And all their notes they've taken are in bright colors, and they're, whatever art supplies are there, they're using all of them. They all came to there's always some evening art project that we do. And so, usually in my crowd, a good 2/3 of the people are all in because they're already self-identified as creatives. But there's always a few who are resistant. So I had one who, when I asked her to color mandalas, she said, but I have to take notes. And she was the one that, I shared earlier. I'm like, relax, color, see what happens. You won't miss anything. But on day 3 in the morning, and I start every day with a section of, who had any ahas, insights, breakthroughs, breakdowns. And this one woman, the colonel in the Air Force, she stands up and she says, I hate mandalas. And it was hilarious. And she said it, sort of jokingly, but from a place of, I find this so anxiety producing. I don't know what colors to pick. I bought one of these coloring books because everybody said pick a coloring book. And by the end of the day, she had colored a mandala and it was beautiful. I so honored and acknowledged her in that moment for owning what I know so many people feel. And it surprised me because I didn't think about that piece, because I'm sort of fearless when it comes to creativity. Like, just putting color on paper makes me happy, and I'm pretty detached from outcomes. And I think this whole conversation around allowing people to put color on paper without it needing to reflect an image or a symbol or a shape is very helpful. So encouraging people to color outside the lines, or giving them simple creative constraints, which I love talking about creative constraints. I think it's a concept that everyone can get, and it's that we're actually much more creative when we're given constraints. So for example, if I asked you to draw a human figure, you might just faint dead away in front of me. But if I said, hey, take a circle, a triangle, and a rectangle and draw a representation of the human figure, anybody can do that. And so that's an example of creative constraints. And so when you give people simple constraints, like 3 colors and a simple mandala or flower or, children's coloring page, even adults can get into that as long as they understand that it's limited. When you give people too many choices when it comes to creative play, then they tend to freak out because they don't know how to use the supplies. They don't know where to start. It can be really overwhelming. So simplicity is actually the key to moving people through the anxiety and into the play stage, and reminding them that they're not going to be judged, reminding them that we're all creative, reminding them, as Brené Brown says, that we all have creativity scars at some point. Sadly, as children, it's very rare to find a human being that wasn't told you can't about some creative aspect of life. Drawing, painting, dancing, singing, cooking. We've all been told at some point, oh, you should go do something else. You're not very good at that. And it's painful, and we carry this into our adult life. So easing, right, some of those beliefs that we're not creative by constraints, simplicity, and just reminding them that they are ultimately creative.
That's great. And I love that I've said love a lot during this podcast.
Aw, thank you.
I love the fact that you brought up how so many of us have been scarred by something or someone when it comes to our creativity. Mine personally was singing. And
mine too.
Like even now, I go to events and conferences, and my coworkers get up and sing karaoke, and I can do a lot of things. But that is one of them that just the fear really takes over. And I haven't figured out how to get out of that. You don't need to coach me through that right now, but it's just.
I wouldn't know how to coach you through that. I haven't coached myself through it. But it's tempting to go take some voice lessons just for fun, just to build up to that confidence. But oh no, I don't sing in public. I'm right there with you.
I actually thought about taking voice lessons, and I reached out to somebody, and then I couldn't actually bring myself to go and do them.
Yeah.
Remembering that about myself when I'm approaching other people with creativity, because for me, it's so natural and easy to color outside the lines or to draw something ridiculous and not worry about it.
Yeah.
Or, to overpaint something, or, put too much watercolor down and then it looks
muddy.
yeah, muddy. And people will say like, aren't you an art teacher? And I'm like, yeah, but if you only continue with what you know, you never learn anything else.
That's right. That's right. Yes. And not all art teachers are, Picasso, right?
Professional watercolor painters.
There you go. That's
Yeah.
exactly. Oh, I don't like watercolor. It gives me trauma. so, so I think that's the other thing is finding our medium, right? And that medium could be in the
Yeah.
garden. It could be in the kitchen. It could be like one of my favorite new things is I live in Santa Barbara, California, and it's incredibly beautiful here. And something is always blooming. And I walk almost every day and I'm always snapping photos. I don't even do anything with 90% of them. My phone is full of all these gorgeous flower photos. And it makes me happy to pause and have a mindful moment and admire the photo and snap a picture of it, whether I do anything with it or not. And on Instagram, I find that people love my flower photos, right? And, it's just that happy sharing, and it's a creative outlet that doesn't need to be about anything other than me enjoying the beauty, the color, and the wonder of the moment.
We share some similar processes for sure. Mine is not flowers, but I recently posted on my coaching Instagram, which is different from my podcast Instagram, something about how I like to go for photo walks, like very intentionally go for photo walks, but I'm not looking for flowers. I really like texture. So I like the way
Cool.
that like concrete has kind of like fallen apart, or what's
Yes.
left when paint is taken off of something, or even poles when the posters and the tape have been removed, like all the
Yes.
residue that's left. So my
Yes.
phone is just like full of textures.
I love that. I love that. So texture is amazing. And it's like, who cares what you do with it, right? And maybe you'll do something with it at some point. And it's just the joy in the moment, right?
Yeah. And just the
Yeah.
being present and mindful and outside and doing something
Yeah.
that is intentional. But
Yes.
there's also this like level of non-intentionality. That's not a word. Being
Well, to me,
non-intentional.
it's not process oriented and it's
Yeah.
not product oriented,
Perfect.
right? So it's intentional and it's beautiful and it's on purpose and it's joyful and all the fun things, but you're not doing it with, oh my God, I got to go take photos to build my Instagram, right? Which ruins everything because
Yeah.
then it creates this extra pressure on the other side. Although someday, who knows, they might become amazing backgrounds for your Instagram favorite quotes or something, right? Like, so, there's always the possibility of that. And so I think being in the playfulness, and to me, what you described, it's such a mindful practice as well, to really pause and notice what's around it. And I find a lot of really beautiful connections between creativity or creative expression and mindfulness, and using creative expression as a form of mindfulness, especially for people that don't always enjoy a sitting meditation and struggle with monkey mind. Coloring mandalas, walking and taking pictures, playing with clay, washing dishes. Like, there's so many ways you can bring elements of creativity and creative expression into your day that really open us up in whole new ways that allow problems to get solved when we're not thinking about them, allow new ideas and creative inspiration to arise when we're not thinking about them. So I'm a big fan of looking for those really, really simple ways to incorporate creative expression into our daily practice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So we've talked about creativity and creative expression. Let's talk about creative thinking.
Yes, it's all the same, right? At the end of the day. For me, creative thinking, as it's used a lot in classrooms and in corporate environments especially, is about problem solving. And you see a lot in the media, on Forbes and Entrepreneur and some of the other big outlets about there's an outcry for more creativity and innovation. And I think really what they're talking about is problem solving. It's brainstorming, and it's creating safe environments for people to come up with new ideas without fear of judgment. the thing that I see, and I remember experiencing this, and a lot of it was internal, not external, but, I can remember being in grad school in a, classroom with all these and then I went to Stanford, so I'm, surrounded by all these super, super smart people. And I often lacked the confidence to raise my hand and share an idea or a response, an answer to a question from the professor, because of fear of looking stupid in front of my peers. And it was totally just lack of confidence, right? And so just that sense of how can we as educators in particular in any arena make it safe for our kids to be innovative in their thinking and come up with the silliest, most extreme, most exciting ideas. And it's all about the more ideas that we generate and the more collaborative we are in the brainstorming and sharing of ideas, the more that we stay in that creative thinking space from my perspective.
It's fun. Like, it's so fun to think of the biggest, most ridiculous ideas.
Yes.
We're going to pause the episode there for a moment because we talked about creative interrupts. This is your creative interrupt. We're going to pause the conversation, and I am going to ask you to, if you haven't yet subscribed, just go ahead and hit subscribe to Outside the Bubble and leave a review on iTunes. I would love it if you left a review if you're loving this conversation, if you've been listening for a while. Just take a moment and leave a review. Let me know what you're thinking, how you feel about this conversation, and any other topics that you'd like to hear on Outside the Bubble. Thanks so much for listening. Let's get back to the conversation.
Like, how ridiculous can you get? And, some of there's a lot more study, talk, conversation happening around design thinking skills, which came out of the creative industries, so big advertising agencies and design agencies, that has really spilled over into especially technology, and where there is a constant desire for more innovation and problem solving. And, the Silicon Valley is a hotbed of this in Northern California. And design thinking is brilliant when it's collaborative across disciplines. So also in a classroom situation, having creative thinking in the classroom doesn't mean solving a math problem just with math, but how could you do it with words, or how could you do it with pictures, and how silly can we get about this? Invites kids, again, to be in this judgment-free space, because people get shut down when somebody says that idea is stupid or that will never work. And oftentimes people aren't meaning to be mean. That was redundant, but they aren't intending to be mean or rude, but it's like, oh, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. And so if we can teach kids from the beginning how to be in these collaborative, creative thinking sessions where it is just kind of this fun free-for-all, I think it builds a really critical skill to their future success in the workplace. Because what is happening, and especially with women, I'm getting so much feedback from women about they're still afraid to speak up in meetings because their ideas are being stolen, or they're afraid they're going to get shut down, or they're, in tech and the sciences and the only woman in the room or one of a few women in the room. And so there's this, important conversation to be had around we can create more creative spaces fairly effortlessly if we remove judgment, blaming, and shaming from the context of the space.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. I was actually talking to some coworkers today about something quite similar. And I said that because we work in education, which is predominantly female, and we work in a union, we don't have that same sort of context that other women have in their job environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what it's like to sit in those environments.
I don't either, thankfully, because I've been an entrepreneur for so long.
When we're having conversations with our female students about what they want to do and going into the workforce, we hear that we need more women in tech, we need more women in STEM. But if women feel this way in these industries, it's very hard to promote it to our female students.
Sure. And I do think it's changing. I think that what I'm seeing both in the millennial generation and the generation behind them, which is Gen Z. I know my daughter keeps telling me there's all these different names for her generation, but I'm seeing a different level of confidence that is sort of awe-inspiring. And I see it in more girls than I probably have in the past. And I'm seeing less tolerance for that kind of environment. Like, millennials have gotten a bad rap because they don't stay at workplaces. Well, the reason they don't stay is because they don't feel like they're being seen, listened to, or rewarded or acknowledged for their contributions. So engagement is a huge part of the conversation. And part of the reason they lack engagement is because the environments are very judgmental. And, talking about these young generations coming up into the workplace, they are so innately creative, and I think they own their creativity in a way I haven't seen in a long time, that I don't remember seeing with my own students when I was teaching. And I've taught all levels. I taught high school, university, and adults. And just to see the level of creativity that is innate in them, and I think has a lot to do with just how they were raised and the amount of access they have to new information, new music, new movies, new games, new everything. I think change is coming, but I still see the number one thing that limits women in the workplace is confidence. It's the number one piece of feedback that I get. And it's so funny because it's the number one thing that women really struggle with in their careers, I think, across time. And when it comes to creativity and art making, and sharing our art and selling our art, it's confidence, confidence, confidence. So I would still say that confidence is the number one limiting belief that women today struggle with at all levels of life and work.
I have so many questions about that, but that's like a whole other conversation.
I know we could do a whole conversation around confidence and creativity.
We haven't chatted about this yet, but you have written a couple of books, and one of them is The Artful Marketer. And that is about women and their marketing. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I would say it's about understanding why you need to have a plan in place in order to grow a successful business. And you have to start with a big vision plan and then go into marketing. But the whole thing was designed with creatives and visual thinkers in mind. So my business plan looks like a mandala. You fill it out with crayons and markers, and my marketing plan is done with, big calendars and sticky notes. And because I find with creatives that why they struggle in business is because traditional business training is very linear. And creatives can't go from the thought to linear strategy. We need the creative brainstorming piece in the middle. I think probably a lot of humans do. My husband, he sees structure, like he sees things very linearly. And so we're always a great team when we're collaborating on projects together. But what I found for myself personally, one of the reasons I struggled with my first business was because I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a future thinking plan. I had the marketing down, but marketing doesn't do you any good if it's not attached to a bigger vision of what it is that you want to create in the world. But The Artful Marketer is the book I wrote after a few years of coaching and recognizing, as I'm reflecting back on my clients and the processes I'm teaching, is that nobody was really teaching creatives how to design a business strategy and a marketing strategy in a way that made sense to our crazy creative brains.
Yeah, that's really fascinating for me because I also feel like, just as an educator, the way that we plan and prep and create also doesn't align with my creative thinking.
Right. So I bet you have to do your brainstorming first before you can get to the rest of it, especially in any kind of curriculum or instructional design. Like mind maps are so powerful for that process, and they're visual and playful, and you can move things around. And, so it's just, again, it's bringing in those elements of visual creative thinking that can really shift our confidence in our ideas. When we try to go from idea to structure, it's really hard because we, especially those of us that are very creative, we don't know how to translate what it is that we're seeing in our heads into a 1, 2, 3 outline. There's a translation piece that needs to happen in the middle.
Yes. Yes. So how can teachers incorporate more creativity across disciplines?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit. So I think invite the visual arts teacher into the math class. Look for how can English align with what's happening in science. So looking at teaching from an interdisciplinary approach instead of a siloed approach, which is how life works, is interdisciplinary. Life doesn't work in silos, right? And it's been interesting watching my kids in high school over the last, I guess this is like year 7 or 8. I have one in university now, but watching how they're learning and how the topics in English are tending to reflect more current events. And yes, they're reading classics, but not to the extent that I did when I was in high school. So it's like looking from an interdisciplinary perspective. So how can we teach kids to read and write by reading, writing, and talking about topics that matter to them? Which, my daughter's actually, so she wants to study environmental studies, but she also loves history, and she's in American history this year. And so she came home all excited about some new acronym for remembering all the great wars, and that she was like super happy sharing. So she's excited to be having this conversation about world history, American history, about government, very interested in politics. But it's with, the teachers are doing a good job of putting a contemporary spin and asking, what kind of questions can you ask differently? So I would say an interdisciplinary approach, again, as we talked about before, adding a more visual approach. Where can you add video, music, movement, creative activities to help them embody the information differently? And I think you can do that at all levels, even at high school. It just has to be, like I said, age appropriate. They don't want to watch the same things third graders are watching, but there are plenty of opportunities like Romeo and Juliet's a great example. There's some pretty racy versions of Romeo and Juliet out there, and the kids came home with permission slips about whether or not they could watch them. So how can you teach in a way that connects with how your students want to consume information is one of the questions I would ask. And how can you create and I'm not talking about changing curriculum and how it's taught, but how can you go to your science teacher in your elementary school and say, hey, what are you guys up to? And what element of that could we bring into math right now, right? Like ask creative questions. This is where we go back to creative thinking. And as a faculty at a school, looking down and getting creative about the topics that are being taught and saying, where's our opportunity to co-teach, cross-teach, like double learn information and skills because it's the same topic, but being taught in a different approach, right? Like war is a great one. I mean, for wars, you can talk about technology, you can talk about politics, you can talk about communication skills. There's all kinds of things you can talk about. You can talk about math and budgeting and finance, like just talking about war, which would not be my personal favorite topic to talk about, but talking about war opens up to a very interdisciplinary conversation would be just an example off the top of my head. So again, looking for opportunities to coordinate, collaborate, and cross-teach in ways that feel fun, playful, and interesting to the age of the kids in the room.
When I think about doing cross-disciplinary work as a high school teacher, the first thing that comes up for me is so many barriers. And listening to you talk about it, I really need to start with the thought of like, this could be fun.
Yes.
How can we make this fun? And how can this be joyful for the teachers instead of stressful and another thing that we're doing?
Right.
Even just thinking about my own thinking around that idea means that I have to do some of my own mindset work to approach that in a more joyful way.
And it definitely has to be approached from a place of fun. It's, I talk about this in business all the time. People, creatives in particular, struggle with marketing. They struggle with sales. And I'm like, You have to make it fun. And if it's not fun, you're not going to do it. And there's some things in your business and in your classroom and in life that we have to do that aren't fun. So put a reward system in place, right? It's like, how can, what treat am I going to get? Like one of my clients, she does this so beautifully. It's like once she's done all her finances and all of her marketing, she gives herself points. She has this whole fun point system. And there was some crazy instrument that she wanted. And so she worked up her points and worked through this really, hard part in her business of trying to get a course launched. And when it got launched, she went and bought this cool instrument. Or she has this cute pair of boots she calls her sassy boots. And she got through this other piece of, doing some just back end developmental stuff for her business online, setting up platforms and technology. Not fun for creatives, but she got through it and she got these really gorgeous little leather sassy boots. So there's ways to make this fun and playful. And so it's part of the conversation to have with the teachers. How can we make this fun? I mean, if you think off the top of your head, it's like, is there a science teacher that you like and that you spend time with anyway? Like Maggie's favorite teacher who was her AP environmental sciences teacher and her biology teacher. She made things so fun. They were always doing really creative things. And so this lady also makes pottery. Like it's her fun outside of school creative thing that she does is she makes pottery, right? So she could bring pottery or the ceramics teacher into the classroom and the kids can make something who might never have been at all interested in ceramics, but maybe they're in a botany lesson and you make leaves out of ceramics. Like this doesn't have to be hard. We overcomplicate things. And I know that education, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of barriers, there's so much that you have to accomplish. And so I don't want to in any way minimize or make you feel like I don't really get how much there is to do. I do. But there are small moments that we can create that will be meaningful for you as a teacher and also for your students. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be constructed into curriculum, but where can you just have some fun with the curriculum that you are required to teach?
Yeah, and everything that you've been talking about just really has like the wheels turning. And after this podcast, I want to go and like make some stuff. I'm all like pumped up. I just love talking about creativity.
Yeah, awesome.
This has been a fantastic conversation. From your experience and what you've seen, what are some of the other skills that you see students need to thrive outside of the classroom?
So definitely creative thinking, definitely the idea generation, that willingness and fearlessness and putting their own ideas out there, and anything that we can do in the classroom to boost confidence, to give kids confidence and not false confidence. It's like, oh my God, you're an amazing artist when really they're not. So not any sort of false praise at all, but looking really carefully at our students for what their genius is and finding ways to nurture that. And I know you have lots of kids in the classroom and it can be hard to find that. But I think the more that you can bring creativity into the classroom, the more some of that starts to rise up. But critical thinking skills, creative thinking skills, and ultimately communication skills, making sure that kids know how to, because they've lost this art, they know how to write a letter. That they know how to ask for a letter of recommendation. Like I'm surprised at how much my kids struggled with asking their favorite teachers for letters of recommendation for university applications. But so that the sort of those written communication skills, I think, are especially in high school essential for going further. And I know a lot of that is built into curriculum, but creating opportunities for kids to get some real life practice. Like one of the things, so our Band Boosters basically supports our instrumental music program. There's no funding for the instrumental music program at the local high school from the school district. The money just isn't there. So we do a lot of fundraising. And we get the kids to write letters to people, like handwritten letters, asking for donations to the programs and why the music program matters to them. So in some ways, they're sales skills. They need to be able to, persuasion skills is maybe a better way to put that, and how to confidently talk about themselves and their skills. And in a classroom, it always blows me away, just the level of diversity. You always have a couple of kids with tons of confidence who love speaking up. But how do you support the ones, and this is another conversation for another day, but how do you support the ones that aren't speaking up? And when you have 40 kids in a class or 20 or 30 kids in a class, how, it's almost impossible to take care of all of them. But how can you create opportunities? In fact, our friend Shannon, I saw she's doing a pen pal thing, right? It's like, what are some of the things that we used to do that we could bring back? But how can we encourage kids to use their writing skills more? I would say would be one of the number one things. And how can you make writing creative and fun and not painful? I have a son who hates to write. And he's actually, his communication skills he really struggles with writing. I'll just say that. And I have a daughter who is incredibly lyrical and poetic and a deep thinker, and her writing is masterful. And Connor has amazing other skills. So, not to at all, but writing's not his jam. So he doesn't do it. And so thinking about how can we encourage them to understand some of these real life skills that are the things that will get them wherever it is that they want to go. And I know that's a big, deep conversation, but in the context of creativity, creative thinking, and ideation, and, feeling fearless in their willingness to share their ideas would be the three things that I would share.
I love having these conversations because everyone brings such a unique and different perspective. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. I've learned a ton from you, and I'm pretty excited about some of the strategies that I'm going to use with the adult learners that I have.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear more about what you implement and how it goes.
Where can we find more about you, learn about you, and possibly work with you?
Oh, thank you. So the easiest place to do that is my website, which is simply my name, Minette Riordan. And I am a huge Facebook fan. You can find me on Facebook, send me a friend request, and my business page on Facebook is Dr. Minette Riordan as well.
Do you hang out on Instagram very much?
I do. I love Instagram. I'm there all the time. I actually probably personally spend more time on Instagram. I love the visual nature of it and being more intentional right now and connecting with people on Instagram. So I'm Dr. Minette Riordan on Instagram as well. I'm pretty easy to find, and on LinkedIn. So I'm in all the places.
Fantastic. And I'll link all of that up in the show notes.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Oh, thank you for asking such great questions and for such a really, really rich, juicy conversation. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity and space to talk more about creativity.
Are you on Instagram? If you are, come on over and let's have a conversation about creativity. You can find me at Outside the Bubble Podcast. Let me know what's going on with your personal creativity and how you're using creativity in the classroom. Let me know if you end up implementing any of these strategies or ideas. And if you're stuck, let's get a conversation started. I used to hang out on Twitter, but I didn't really love it. Don't tell anybody. I'm still on Twitter, but I'm kind of loving Instagram right now. I like the DMing. I like how personal it can be. And I just kind of found, to be honest, Twitter was a little bit like spreadsheets for me. It's like all over the place. There's too much going on. So hop on over to Instagram. Let's have a conversation about creativity. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Outside the Bubble. I'll see you next time.